Welcome back. My name is Omar Santos. In this video, I'm going to go over how to build your own lab or cyber range using Proxmox. So let's get started. Proxmox is an open source virtualization technology similar to things like VMware or ESXi, on where you can actually put a cluster of computers or running on one, right? You can run it in one server or one PC, or you can have two or hundreds of different physical servers clustered together, and then having an environment that you can run VMs, and you can also run containers, and in this case, LXC containers, Linux containers. And it's super powerful. It actually includes, many different technologies that are used by many large organizations. For example, it includes or support for Ceph and also GlusterFS, ZFS, and for you to be able to do redundancy and so on. So to download Proxmox, you navigate to proxmox.com, and then you go to downloads, and then in there you have two different options to download the ISO, either directly from them through their website or using BitTorrent as well, right? Now once you download the ISO installer, if you have a let's say an old PC or a beefy server that you may actually have bought, then you can put that into a USB stick, or you can pixie boot the image and then install it within that environment. So once you start the installer, it will actually walk you through how to install it in just a few moments, right? You can select install Proxmox VE, fairly self-explanatory, or in the case that you're debugging or running into some problems, you can also select install Proxmox VE debug mode. In our case, I'm just gonna install it the normal way, so install Proxmox VE. And then after that, I'm asked to even be able to set up the disk environment or to use RAID, right? Or ZFS, right? In my cluster at my home lab, and I'm going to show you that in a few minutes, I do have a RAID, configure and in the form of ZFS, so using software for, so it's not physical RAID, but software RAID based on CFS. I also have Ceph enabled in several of the cluster nodes, and basically that's a block storage, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. But in this case, we select the actual hard disks. Also, after you select your environment and you configure RAID if you would like to, or just select the hard drive that you will be installing Proxmox into, then you click on next, and the next screen will walk you on how to set up all your localizations, your time zone, your country, the keyboard layout, and so on. Once you click on next, then that's where you put your administrative or administration password and your email address, right? Now, by the way, Proxmox actually come in two different factors. You have the community edition, which you have in here, and it's exactly the same. But you can purchase a subscription or subscribe to their service and then obtain additional support for your implementation. In this case, I'm actually just using the community edition or the open source free version. And then after that, you go and select your management interface, you set up your host name, the IP address. It will be a static IP address that you will be connecting to manage your node. And in this case, you will launch your browser, and you will see that firsthand in a few minutes, and on a specific port. And then that's how you manage your deployment, whether it's a single node or a cluster. Then of course you set up your netmask, your gateway, your DNS servers, and then once you click on next, it will actually extract all the packages, it will install the files, and it will provide you with a summary of everything that is going to be installing in this and the configuration, so your IP address, the host name, the net mask, and so on, and then you click on install and it will install it for you. It will then reboot the machine, and then after it reboots, you will connect to it using your browser on the IP address that you selected over port 8006, right? So once you connect to it, in my example here, I already have a cluster configured. So I want to at least show you how you can have multiple physical servers and then put them into a cluster. And in my case, I only have 5 different nodes within my cluster, and all these nodes, the one that you see, Dionysius, Hermes, and Poseidon, and NukeProx, and so on, those are physical servers. So some of them are, yes, big servers, or some of them are actually just PCs that I actually put together and put them in a rack with a case that that will be rack mountable. And a couple of these are Intel NUCs. So I have a pretty wide range of different machines that can be part of a cluster. So you don't have to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars. You can actually have a couple of Intel NUCs. And if you don't know what an Intel NUC, I'm highlighting the screen here, a link that you can become familiar with that. It's a small form factor, PC looking, devices that, they can be actually fairly powerful, right? And in some environments in here, I just have a glorified PC, with a whole bunch of RAM, a whole bunch of hard drives, and then running, things like ZFS and Ceph into it. Now with Proxmox, you can use it to create your own VMs, or you can also create containers. And these are LXC containers. The cool thing about Proxmox is that each of the devices or each of the nodes in here, you can configure things like Linux bridges or networking capabilities like Open vSwitch, and then create a fairly complex environment where you can have different VLANs, different segregated networks, and then simulate an enterprise. You can actually have a full cyber range, which, by the way, a cyber range is a dedicated environment that in many cases you're mimicking an infrastructure or of an organization, and then you use that environment to practice your skills or to do attack simulations, right? To basically simulate attacks against your organization, right? Now, in my case, I actually have many different VMs. As you see here, I have VMs running open source tools like pfSense for firewalls. I also have VMs running Security Onion, which is a Linux distribution for incident response and threat hunting. And talking about threat hunting, I also have Red Hunt OS, several versions of Kali and Websploit and what I call Websploit Lite, which is actually just the containers that come in Websploit. And by the way, if you don't know what Websploit is, I have a different video that I created that basically I introduce a learning environment that I put a whole bunch of containers, a whole bunch of different tools on top of Kali Linux that has over 400 different exercises that you can complete. So if you want to become familiar with it, look for the video in the link that is in the description. Now you also have a Websploit running in different areas and different networks. And I do that by using Open vSwitch. And then each of the nodes, as you see here, I'm navigating to Hermes. If you click on network, you have different network interfaces. So the first few are physical network devices, right? And you see there, type network device. And the other ones are either Linux bridges. So I'm bridging interfaces using the underlying Linux capabilities and then assigning VLANs to them because it's actually, they're VLAN aware. And then the last bridge that you see here, VMBR3, that's an Open vSwitch bridge that I also have associated to a specific network. And as you see here is a 10.6.6.x network. So in other words, 24-bit mask network that I have several of these VMs running and simulating attackers, simulating, different victims or, target devices, running web services, running different applications. And then once I actually, manipulate the network, I can create port mirroring from OVS to things like Security Onion or Red Hat OS, and then use things like Snort or Suricata, and then visualize that environment using things like ELK or the Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. Now I'm going to do a series of videos that are dedicated to how to run Security Onion, what are the capabilities there, some of the tools that I mentioned. I'm going to also have another video that I'm going to go over Red Hat OS. So stay tuned. More of those are actually going to come by. Now, the other cool thing about Proxmox is, as I mentioned to you, you can perform many different tasks that are enterprise-grade, environments. For example, you can do replication between the nodes, so you can have some of these VMs replicate in other nodes within the cluster, or you can use things like Ceph to do block storage across all the nodes, and basically you keep adding hard drives or keep adding nodes, and that's how you scale. Basically, you're creating your own cloud environment, for the lack of a better word. Now, if you look to the left, I have several what it looks like databases, but those are the either hard disks that are associated within the machine itself. So you see local Hermes and local Hermes 500 as a NVMe SSD that I have, and I have a second one here. But I also have these other ones that says POS 10 and POS 4 and POS 8, and those are NFS mounts that I have of ZFS pools that are present in Poseidon, which is the last node in the cluster here. Now, another thing that I want to show you is that you can literally just go to a VM, double click on it, and then you're in the console, right? And in this case, actually, I'm in Websploit, and it's like just like I'm in front of the my PC, probably running things like VMware or running VirtualBox, but in this case through a web browser. Also, you can go and do the same thing with a container, right? I'm just double clicking a container here that I have running with Ansible, and basically you're in the Linux shell in this container. And by the way, what I do very often is that I take advantage of container capabilities that existing here, and also templates that come with Proxmox. In other words, that you can download from the Proxmox environment, and several templates for containers running things like Debian or CentOS or Ubuntu, or turnkey installations of things like OneCloud or OwnCloud rather, or things like WordPress and Jenkins. So there's so much capabilities and so many things that you can actually do here. So some of these containers, what I do is I install Ubuntu and I put web services, I install other vulnerable applications, and then I can use them as my target systems, or vice versa. I instantiate ones like, as you see here, I was running Ansible, and then from there I do a lot of administrative tasks to all the other nodes within the Proxmox environment, and then from there I automate a lot of those administrative tasks. So again, the list goes on and on. This can be a month long class, but I want to highlight just a few more things for you to see the power of this environment. First, you can actually go to data center, and if you deploy Proxmox in one node, of course you're not going to be able to do clustering, right? However, if you have, let's say, two old machines, two old PCs, and you want to put them together and then have an environment like this, you can go under cluster, and then you click create cluster. In my case, I already created a cluster. You have to select one of your machines to be that first cluster node, but all the different administrative tasks are shared among all the nodes, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. But once you create a cluster, then you have the ability to join the cluster from the other node, right? Or from many other nodes if you have more. And to do that, you can click on Join Information. And as you see in the screen, it already populates the IP address of the primary node or the node that was originally created, a fingerprint, and an encoded join information with a whole bunch of different metadata and information and authentication information to join the cluster. If you click on Copy Information, it will put that into your clipboard, and then you go to your second node and then go under clustering again, and then in there you click on Join Cluster. In my case, of course, all my nodes are already participants of the cluster and it's grayed out, but basically you just click on Join Cluster, copy, well, you already copy it, but paste the information to join the cluster, and everything is done automatically. It associates with the primary node. It already gets the information about what resources are available in the secondary node. It even copies your SSH keys from the primary node to the secondary. So fairly powerful in here, right? And you can continue to add nodes. You know, if you have 100 servers, you can add 100 servers into your environment. Now, the last thing that I want to show you is that each of the nodes themselves, you can right click on them. And of course you can create a VM, you can create a container, or you can access the shell. And then from the shell, there are many different commands related to Proxmox. Some of them starts with PVE. And I'm not gonna go over all of this in here today because we're gonna be here forever if I do so. But you can do a lot of administrative tasks from the CLI as well, not only from the GUI, right, or the web interface. And one last thing, and I promise this will be the last one. I'm going to show you how you can also create templates. And basically, if you have a container, let's say you have a container running Ubuntu and you install Nginx and you want that to be your base container for, you know, whatever applications you want to write or whatever systems you want to, you know, hack or and so on. Basically, you can just right click on, you know, once you have the container instantiated, you can right click on that and convert to template. And then from there, once it's converted to a template, and you see that I have one here, it's called USC-template. That means Ubuntu server template. I can right click on that and then I click on clone. Now, whenever you go to cloning, of course, you know, there's an ID, there's a target node, and as a matter of fact, you can actually do this to any of the nodes using the template. And whenever I say any of the nodes in the cluster. And in this case, the host name, you know, I'm just gonna put test123, or let's put test container. And then there's two ways you can do you know, the cloning, either link clone, which is the default, or full clone. I typically do full clones, and basically a link clone is that if you want to share resources and the primary template, right, or the template that you created, and they're called linked because the new image still refers to the original. Then, you know, basically unmodified data blocks are read from the original image, but the modifications are actually written. So in other words, you know, after you modify your container, then you actually, you know, add, you know, so the system will add that information into it. I, again, you know, typically just do an independent either container or VM. This applies to both containers and VMs. And then from there, you know, again, I have a little bit of space and hard drive and resources in here. So if you're resource constrained, probably link clone may work for you. In my case, you know, I just want separate containers or separate VMs. But, you know, once I do that, and of course I click on clone, and it will take just a few minutes to complete. Now, once you clone the devices, you can go under, in this case, if it's a container, under resources, and then you can change the swap, the number of cores for the CPU, the amount of memory, and you can also change the networking. You can add interfaces or modify the interfaces, modify VLANs, for example. In the case of VMs, it's exactly the same. You know, basically, fairly similar, right? But you can also use things like Cloud Init to automate a lot of the provisioning of your new VM as well, right? You can back up the VMs, you can perform replication among different nodes within the cluster, and much, much more. This is an amazing set of amazing resources that you can actually, have in just a few, I will not say minutes, but at least, you can instantiate Proxmox, in a couple of hours and get some pretty comprehensive lab environments that you can then, practice your skills in a very safe environment. And both from an ethical hacking perspective, or ethical hacking or pen testing, as well as in the security and the defensive side, or things like incident response and forensics and so on. So I hope you liked the video. Please stay in touch, and I'll see you in the next one.